I can tell you I'm on the right side of history. I'm on the right side of history. If you want to get it wrong, or giving your money to the generation, the opportunity. The opportunity to see our lives. Opportunity to see what with us.
Okay, so we are good to go. Are we?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. From is the Pioneer Day School Africa's alumni, and we shall be touching things that are affecting the African continent, especially pertinent matters that are affecting Africa. And the aim or sole goal of this podcast is not just to identify problems, but equally to propose solutions, strategies that will help grow a better Africa. So I'm not alone today. I am with Celestine, who is joining us all the way from Nigeria. By the way, I'm Sharon Jakes, joining all the way from Cameroon. Hello, Celestine. Good afternoon.
Hello, Sharon. Good afternoon to you. And how is that this afternoon?
So, today's topic is very pertinent. I really love this topic a lot because it is at the heart of some of the problems we already have across Africa. We're talking about youth versus old guard. And today we're asking ourselves the question if young leaders across Africa are truly ready, to take up the baton of command, to take up power on the continent, or do they just need to learn more from the older leaders that are already existing in the continent, and we shall be using case studies that is Cameroon, Uganda, and Nigeria, because these are some of the countries that have some of these issues. And Cameroon, for instance, just witnessed elections in October last year. Uganda is going to have elections come January 15, 2026, and Nigeria has elections scheduled for 2027. So this topic is very much important at this point in time. So, Celestine, to kickstart this conversation, from your opinion, you are a young leader, you're quite an alumni of the Young Political Leadership School Africa. You have experience on the field, having, been in different programs and learn about leadership. So, what can you tell us, in your own perspective, who's a young leader, and do you believe, why do you think that this debate of, readiness of young leaders across Africa continue to persist at this very point in time? Celestine, are you with me?
Yeah, I am. Your screen is frozen. I mean, your screen was my screen rather was frozen for a short time, so I thought it was from my end.
Yeah, so
But
I
the
was
last
asking
question I heard,
that
yeah.
from your perspective as a young leader, how would you describe, how would you, edify our audience on who a young leader is, and why does this debate around, the readiness of young leaders to take up power on the continent continue to persist, especially now on the African continent?
Okay, it's a very broad range question, and I would want to first start by saying, there are a variety of options or ways to define who a young leader is. There's the age, there's the age definition, there's the definition of mindset. Some people say youthfulness is a mindset. Some say that it is age. For me, I prefer not to always answer questions in polarity, like just a yes or no kind of answer. I think first and foremost, youthfulness has to do with the age, the vitality. That's one aspect. And then another one, it also truly is the mind. All right. So those are the
Mhm.
two areas I would want to approach it from. So it is age, yes, and then also the mindset or the mentality. So yeah, that's it for me.
Well, I'll just add up to what you said already, Celestine. We are in a continent where we have leaders that feel like they are from another generation. This is not an
Yeah.
exaggeration. I think it's a reality. We have, you know, um we have old leaders on the continent, and young leaders feel at some point like they don't really have their place. That
Yeah.
is from my perspective. That's why we keep having this conversation. Are young leaders truly ready? If you're not, if you don't have, a godfather somewhere, if you don't have someone to hold your hand and put you in a position, it feels like you're not good enough. But I think this generation, we're getting to, like you said, it's a change of mindset. We need to, start to think differently, try to figure out if we were leaders, how are we going to change things. It's not just about criticizing our leaders, right? And let's take, for instance, a nation like Cameroon. If we have to, understand the political realities on the continent. Cameroon had elections in December, no, in October 2025. And we had a leader who had been in power for over 40 years. He was re-elected. And we ask
Yeah.
ourselves questions. But
Yeah.
when you look at a country like Cameroon, given the political space that is already there, that's already tense, I could cite a nation like Uganda. We have our very own, our very own alumni that are two of them. We have Adepo Francis and the others. They're running for parliaments there in Uganda, given the tense atmosphere. And I was reading an article just yesterday by CNN's correspondent Larry Madowo. I was like, it's so when you look at the atmosphere in which the country is, we ask ourselves questions.
Intense.
But
Yeah.
beyond all this, Cameroonians, Africans, Ugandans, Nigerians need a safe space, especially young leaders, to be able to thrive. Now,
Very true.
when we look at all these countries, in Nigeria, for instance, Celestine, we have former military leaders. I would like to cite the former president Olusegun Obasanjo, Buhari. They returned after being military leaders to being elected presidents. And this is not the only country. We saw a similar case in Gabon. We saw a similar case in Guinea-Conakry. With this said, in your own perspective, why do we have, why does this recycling of old power continue to persist on the African continent? Is it a lack of trust, or is it that the African people don't really believe, they don't trust young leaders to take the continent forward?
Okay. This is first and foremost. This is one of the questions that I personally have thought over and over again. And then I
Mm-hmm.
found some responses that sat well with me and I held on to them. It may not be a generally accepted response by everybody, but this is my own opinion about this. So, first things first, one of the things about politics in Africa is trust. Around the world, around the globe, is trust. People actually want to see a track record of what you have done in order to trust you. And if you notice those leaders that you mentioned just now, like Olusegun Obasanjo and the late Muhammadu Buhari, you will notice something about them in their tenure, whether as military leaders. People of Nigeria, now I'm now very being very country specific now. The people of Nigeria
Mm-hmm.
specifically saw that, oh, this man did this when he was in power. So he did this when he was in power. That registers in the minds of voters, of people. All right. So whenever they see such a person now come to run for office in the ballot and they see a very unfamiliar young face, it is 100% certain each time that they would want to give their vote to that person. Say, Buhari, that time Buhari did this, or that time Obasanjo did this. Why? Because a vast majority of people they fix their gaze or they fix their ideas of voting for leaders based on historical perspectives. Even if the leader has not changed, has not grown into something better, they just rely on the, I won't call it past glory now, or but they rely on somewhat the experience or things that they've seen that leader do in order to vote them. But one of the questions that I always ask in this regard is if these young leaders that we keep shouting about, like Sharon, like Celestine, like Leon, if we never get the chance to take up this responsibility, where would we prove ourselves worthy? So I leave it at that.
Now, Celestine, you said young leaders are actually, they are ready to take up the baton of command on the African continent. That leads me to the next question. You know, I mentioned earlier on the syndrome of godfatherism in Africa. Do you think that young leaders are not yet at the helm because they lack some sort of the money, the structures, or there is this just lack of accessibility to some of these things that will help them have a smooth journey or have a smooth leadership journey?
Okay. Uh, uh, First things first, every single thing you mentioned is actually, remember when I started responding, I said, I do not like to give a very straight response and say yes or no, this is the answer. So let me take you around a bit and then land somewhere. So, first things first, one of the things that go with age is experience. On a scale of 1 to 10, if you want to rate two politicians, the one that is older most times will largely be rated as more experienced, right? Most times. Now, resource wise, especially in Africa, that we know that poverty is highly weaponized and poverty is something that is widespread. There are some
Mhm.
specific financial capacity that young persons cannot boast of. I mean, some young persons cannot boast of, which these older politicians have. They also have a very good structure. For instance, some of them have been in politics way before some of us were born. Some of them, 1970s, they were in politics. Now it's like, 2026, they are still very, very relevant. So they have structure, they have connections, they have people across board. You are just a young person from somewhere, eager to, lend your voice and do what's right because you think you're suffering from. But resources may not be readily available to young politicians. That's one. I'm trying to list what I think the challenges are now in that regard. Resources, one. Then you mentioned something about godfatherism. Godfatherism is not the idea, but I will call it mentorship. Mentorship is one thing that the younger politicians are lacking. Right? So even when they get mentorship, the mentorship now becomes a very what's the word now? It becomes a transactional kind of mentorship where that young politician can be used as a tool to achieve what the older one wants. Not really, you are coming there with the idea of I want to transform this, I want to change this, but your principal or the person who is funding you or who is trying to make things better for you is directing or channeling your energy towards something else. So those are the key things, like I mentioned: finance, the experience, and mentorship. So yeah, those are largely the challenge with younger
Yeah, I agree with you, but I would like to say that there is this thing they always say, before young leaders can be able to, take up certain positions, they should learn from older leaders. But I don't entirely agree because after always tell us, those are YPLSA, we actually agree. After always say it's good to learn, you need to unlearn, you need to relearn, and this is the essence of leadership. We cannot start from somewhere without getting somewhere. When we are moving, it's all about us, making mistakes as young people, correcting these mistakes, standing up, being united above all, because unity, they say, is strength. And across the African continent, as young leaders, it's very important for us to, learn from our mistakes if we want to build that continent that we always dream of. Now, let's look at other things. Though we are alumni of the Young Political Leadership School Africa, we equally have this question. Do you think that, these leadership programs across the continents like YPLS Africa, we have the Mandela Washington Fellowship, we have Yali, Yadek, amongst others, do you think they're enough to prepare young leaders to actually take up those leadership roles that are needed across the continent? Are they enough, truly?
So this question is very, very strategic. Um, to answer your question directly, they are not enough. For instance, how many persons do Washington Fellowship take from each country each year? I don't know if you have an idea, but I don't think more than 50 people go in a year. I doubt that more than 50 persons go from the whole of the African continent. Yeah. So if Mandela Washington Fellowship takes just about 50% or so in a year, another one takes just this few. There's no way, and we say that the African youth population is getting bigger by the day. So there's no way we can keep up with that pace. What I recommend specifically, in fact, I'm even drafting a program in that regard right now, which I'm going to make open to the stakeholders in my own state in Nigeria, Edo State, to see if they will embrace the idea. So it is an idea where more experienced leaders can mentor younger leaders, just like YPLSA is, for example. But it will now be state specific, because if we do one that is national, we may end up picking just two or three persons to come from each state.
Exactly.
But I'm planning one where we have a structure where, for instance, if you have 18 local governments in that particular state, there are 36 states and the FCT in Nigeria. So my state, Edo State, we have 18 local governments. So I'm planning a program, a leadership, mentorship and fellowship program where there is um, there's a possibility of picking two persons from each local government. 2 times 18, that gives 36 for a 3 months or 4 months training. That goes on next year. Next session, we do the same and we do the same. So if this kind of training, they are made state specific, all right, and then the more experienced leaders in those states, they train, because sorry for diverging just this way. Also notice something: leadership or politics is also state specific. You understand? So the kind of leadership or the kind of politics that is practiced in my state, for instance, may not be practiced in another state. So the leaders who have
Exactly. Yeah.
experienced that my own state, and they are now national leaders, they should be the ones coming back to come and train the younger people to understand that this is how it is done, this is how it's done. You can add your own flair to it, and however, but since we learned and we are now in the national level, this is how we have learned. We are now your mentors. You understand? So that is what I am planning to do. But to answer your question directly, Mandela Washington Fellowship, Young Political Leadership School Africa is just not. They are just not enough. They're not enough. That's my
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, though you think they are not enough, it's true that we might get the bottom. Look, for instance, YPLS, we have alumni in about 13 African countries. But beyond that, when you acquire the skills, I think
Yeah.
to some extent, YPLS has actually cemented what is needed, because they don't just give you the theory. At least for some people, the alumni get internship, practicing with stakeholders, and then getting ready for what it looks like on the field. But aside that, when you look at programs, when people go to programs, attend programs, and come back, what is next? What is next is, at the end of the day, you equally have to put in efforts. You need to, try to bring about, if you're doing change, it doesn't matter, you must not be a politician. You can be in different walks of life. You could be in medicine, for instance. You could be in economy. You could be in health, or whatever sector, technology, just to cite this few. But at the end of the day, what makes it special is the fact that amidst everything, you keep impacting your community. It doesn't end with you just got a little effort you chip in every day, right? To bring about that change. And I'm sure, Celeste, you agree with me that at the end of the day, it's about the little efforts that we do. We're having this conversation because we still have leaders that it feels like they're not literally accountable. And when we look at all this, all these disparities, we're looking at the gaps that will exist between or among young leaders on the continent. Let's try to have a deep dive into what's happening. This issue of unity across Africa. Though we have young leaders that continue to connect across the continent, they're trying to do things, impact their communities, be it collectively or singly, or alone. I'd like to find out from you, just to beef up this conversation. let our audience know a little. What is the real problem? Do you think the real problem about readiness on the continent is tied to somewhat unity, or is just the lack of collective efforts? African youths or African leaders don't really want to work together.
Okay, this. I mean, anyways, you're a journalist, so every of your questions they just hit home straight. Um, I of recent I found myself listening to um, uh, Professor Lumumba a lot, quite a lot, and
Yes.
if you hear him, he's largely about the Pan African spirit, Pan Africanism. So
Mhm.
that's
Ubuntu.
one thing that I yes Ubuntu. So that's one thing I think is now missing in the African continent. In fact, what is happening now, in my view, especially with either young or old leaders, I know you specifically mentioned young leaders, but just allow me spread this, is the fact that Africa has now been so divided that we are now fighting different battles, and as a result, we cannot think as one any longer.
Okay.
The reason why it worked easier or easily for those leaders then to start talking about Pan-Africanism, unity, helping other African countries to get free was because the challenge then was just about freedom. It was just about independence. So they could think and say, let's come together. Nigeria could come together and say, let's help this country get free. Ghana and South Africa or whatsoever, all countries could come together in Africa and say, let's help South Africa get free. The likes of Nnamdi Azikiwe, that we call Zik in Nigeria, and quite a host of them, they could come together then and meet and say, let's help this our brother. They call themselves brother. They call the whole continent, continent of brothers. Let's help them get free.
Mhm.
Nowadays, Mali is trying to fight off or ward off external powers coming to, according to them, grab resources. Nigeria, we are trying to fight corruption. We are trying to fight insecurity. We are trying to get help from where help is not coming from. Niger, they are fighting theirs, terrorism, corrupt. You understand? So I think, like I mentioned earlier, the differences in the challenges we are facing is now one of the reasons why unity is almost seeming impossible. Why? Because there will be an idea that, oh, me, I'm trying to solve my problems at home. I've not even solved my problems. Where will I come and start thinking of how I will solve the general African problem at large? But the truth is that we have to get it right from somewhere. So our leaders first
Exactly.
have
Yeah.
to start, yes, they have to first start by, you know, solving. You can't solve every problem, I know, but they have to at least make attempts, not just make an attempt, but also solve strategically the challenges of their own state. And then they should speak. But in fact, Africa needs unity in every area. I learned from research recently that Africa trades more with other continents than it trades within herself.
Mm-hmm.
There are much more travel restrictions within Africans for Africans
And
than
out
when
of
you go
Africa.
outside
Mm-hmm.
than when you go outside Africa. There's actually a petition that's going up now by my mentor where he's asking everyone to help sign the petition um, to get people to be able to travel, visa free within Africa. It's actually a very big play. Some persons who have
Mm-hmm.
experienced it, when they recount their experience, you will know how it is. So to round off on that, I must say that Africa has to think as one. So our leaders have to come together, whether young or whether old. Don't only connect with other young leaders or with other leaders for selfish or only personal purpose. Think beyond just yourself. Think Africa and think large. Thank you.
Yeah, I love the way this is going already. And for those that are just joining us, you know that this is the Pioneer podcast of the Young Political Leadership School Africa. And we're discussing today youth versus old guard, asking the question if young leaders are truly ready to take over power on the continent of Africa, or they still need to learn from the established leaders on the continent. Meanwhile, let's continue this conversation. I remember the NSAS, protests in Nigeria. I remember the end bad governance protests in Nigeria. the Gen Z protests in other countries across the continent, and we've just had, protests upon protests by young leaders in different countries across the continent, seeking for better conditions, seeking for change in the way things are done. But away from that, you know, Celestine, though we have some of this, some of this protests that have emanated in the past years, in the past months, and so on and so forth. We saw protests in Tanzania recently. Amidst all this, if young leaders had to take up power today, do you think it would be strategically wise for them, strategically, using wisdom for them to infiltrate the existing system, existing structures that have been instituted by these older leaders to learn the system and, take over power? Would that be a good decision, or is literally going to make them being those that they were trying to change?
Okay. If I get you correctly, you're saying um, how would young people get into the system, or how would they get into the system and infiltrate the system so that they do not look like the same old
Not
leaders
quite.
that they were trying to. Okay, so let me get you correct. Just
It's more like if they had to today, would it be wise for them to, get back into those structures that they have so much condemned, get back into that system they've condemned, learn from the system, build alliances from
oh,
them,
oh yeah,
before
sure,
they take
sure.
over power.
So there's this concept I know I have, which is that there's no new without the old. There's no new
Truth,
without the old.
exactly.
You cannot
The very
you
essence of
cannot
this conversation.
Yes, so you cannot come into the system and scatter everything and say we are starting from. You don't start anything from afresh. There's always there's always a foundation. So what you do is that you know that there's a foundation. Even if the wrong things were not put in that foundation, now you have to start building with the right values.
Building.
But yes, just to correct, I think earlier when I thought about this, I had to, take down a point somewhere, and I mentioned that. Let me see if I could stay close there. So yeah, so I said I will not really call it taking power. When we say taking power, you sound to the older leaders, you sound like you are
Like it's
coming
a
to
coup
compete
d'etat.
with them. You understand?
Yeah.
So you're not coming to take power, but you're actually it's a call to
Yes.
position yourself. So we're
Mm-hmm.
positioning ourselves for power, not taking in that regard. But yes, young people can come into the structure
Mm-hmm.
and then come in with ideas. Something that goes with youthfulness is also ideas, innovation. Come in with those things and then change the narrative or the perspective. So that is how I see. So you don't go there and you scatter everything and say we are starting from ground zero. No, no, no,
Yeah, I even remember a statement. There was one of these interviews. He has stated that a true leader is one who comes and try to evaluate what has been done by the previous, assess what worked and what didn't work. Then you try to correct or right the wrongs, because it's not just about saying that, oh, I'm a leader today. I don't want anything that has ties to the previous person to exist, but it's about making our country, making our continent much greater than what we found it. And if we're having such conversations, it's because we continue to crave for this change we want on the continent. We want a better continent, right? So, given that we mentioned that some of the institutions or structures that already exist on the continent don't really or are not designed for young leaders to succeed. But amidst all this, there is still room for change. So, in just like given we're gradually coming to the end, if you had to outline some sort of roadmap to help young leaders across Africa genuinely take over power, or better still, we'll not use the word take over power,
position themselves,
position themselves for
position
power.
themselves to,
Yes,
yeah.
if we had to, right, design a roadmap for young leaders across the continent of Africa to, genuinely position themselves for power in the next 5 to 10 years. For would that roadmap look like if we had top priorities?
I may not prioritize them in any way, but I'm going to just mention as they come
Okay.
into. So So one of the things, there's thankfully this is a youthful podcast, so I can use some languages that are radio friendly or TV friendly or YouTube friendly. So there's a term in Nigeria we say, not be cho cho cho. Cho 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 means many talk. So it is now time,
Yes.
yeah. So it is time to show working. Workings. We also use that word, show working. So one of the things that I know that young leaders can do, myself inclusive, is to show value, to show that you have value. When you have value, old, young, your race, people that are not of your race, they will embrace the value that you have. When you have consistently
Mm-hmm.
given value, when you have consistently given value, nobody can people can be against you, but they cannot deny the result of the value that you give. So whatsoever field you are in, as a young person, one of the ways you can position yourself for power is to keep on giving value, to be valuable in that area or in that field. That's one particularly. And then I would want to also say that this is largely related to building value. You have to. There's something called. I'm currently in the school of politics, policy, and governance here in Nigeria. I just recently became this. So one of the things that we prioritize or that we are always taught is the three C's. It's called character, competence, and capacity. Character, competence, and capacity, which means for young leaders to position themselves to be able to take up these positions or take up a power, if that is the word, we must we
About
must
that earlier. Yeah.
yeah, we must develop character. It must be said that this person is values driven. We must develop
Mm-hmm.
competence, the ability,
Person has integrity.
yes, and then capacity to handle tasks or to handle anything that is given. If you are anybody and you have an antecedent, you have a track record of being someone with character, you are competent and you have the capacity to do whatever you are given to do. Trust me, almost all doors will open or every door will open. So that is my take on
That's true. That's true. And education is very important because looking at us, if we're having this podcast, is because we've learned of the importance of being informed, right? Information that says power. And we're hoping that young leaders gradually join this movement because time to say is now, it's not tomorrow. It's if you take a country like Rwanda, for instance, we have young leaders that have been put into leadership positions. I remember the minister of youth affairs is a young lady. The same case, the minister of women affairs in Chad, for instance, is equally a young lady. But these are little steps. The little things we do create impacts. We might not see it now, but it's shaping the future that we intend to see on the continent. And that's the very essence of such conversations. But aside that, in my own points out, I just add to what you've said that though we are grooming young leaders, these young leaders should not just be limited to politics because we have agriculture, which is like the backbone of every society. We have, technology that's gradually taking the world. And if we have to stand a chance to be in that continent, that people will not just be going out, having constant brain drain every now and then, we should equally have a continent that can build itself, that will make people instead to see that continent for what it is and want to keep coming to us. So we equally have to invest in STEM. We have to invest in other sectors, and that's what makes us, this strong. Like you said, it's all about adding value to ourselves. So just to, before we wrap up, while we are on a continent, I would like to, in just one sentence, before I chip in my own opinion, and then we conclude today's podcast. I would like you to say, in your own words, just to conclude this conversation, are young African young leaders, ready to position themselves for power on the continent, or they are not yet ready? And if they are not ready, why? In just one sentence, please.
Oh man, you're making this difficult in one sentence. Okay, so not everyone is ready. Not everyone is
True.
ready. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
not every young leader is ready. And what was the second part of the question?
If they are not ready, are they truly ready? If they are not ready, why is that so? Are they ready or not? And why?
Okay, okay. I think for now, not I think it's clear fact that many young leaders are now ready. Just that the systems and the structures have not yet opened up to them, but many young leaders are ready now to now take position themselves to take power.
Mm-hmm. So, in my own opinion, I think that as young leaders, we are ready, though we still have glitches. Like I said, there's always room for us to learn. So, every young leader that is, watching us at this very point in time, you should know that you have the capacity, you have the potential to turn this continent around. It's not just about sitting down there and criticizing it. It's not just about saying that, yes, you can do it, but take up action. Because at the end of the day, the little that we do, it's like that mustard seed that we keep sowing, and at the end of the day, it's going to grow into a very big tree. Like in Cameroon, we say the baobab. So I would like to urge you all to, continue to create impact in your community. And at the end of the tunnel, that change is going to turn into something that you're going to look back and like, it's true. I thought I was going to bring change, but I did not expect it to get to this level. So, young leaders, like we always say, the power of Ubuntu, yes, we can. We will continue to impact our communities, we'll continue to change this great continent. In fact, change it to something much better. Improve it. Why not? Redefine the continent. Thank you so much for taking our time to be with us. We have come to the end, but we're creating room for questions. If anybody has a question, please feel free. So we're going to take one question. If we have any question, then we'll conclude today's episode. So do we have any question? If we don't have a question, then I think we're going to call it a day. So thank you so much, Celestine. I know you have a busy schedule, but you took out time to, join us on this first pioneer conversation. And I'm glad that we had the opportunity to, hold such conversations. And do stay tuned because we shall be having more and more of this in the days and weeks and months, and why not even years to come. At the end of the day, we just want a greater and stronger continent. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you to all of you for making this possible. And thanks to Emmanuel Tete. I know he's an alumni from Liberia for joining. Thanks to Shara Sledson for the insightful conversation. We look forward to more of this, like you say, in the coming weeks, months, and upward. So thank you and do have a wonderful day. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you too, and have a lovely day too. Bye.
Bye.
Wow, so wonderful.